It's the Full Court Press with Eric Frandsen and Jason Walker.
Welcome back to the to the show that we're doing right now.
Following the local teams, breaking down the biggest games with in-depth analysis and team interview. Join the show by calling into 435-752-1069 or text 435-339-0321. It's the Full Court Press.
Rose, answer, yes! Caught! Touchdown, they did it!
It's the day after podcast here for the Full Court Press. Eric Frandsen, Jason Walker, Utah State with a rough loss last night, 72-47 Thursday evening in Lexington, Kentucky. And so before Jason leaves Lexington, thought we'd hop on for another reaction podcast here on the Full Court Press on 1069fm.com and the 1069 The Fan mobile app. But rough night for the Aggies. It didn't start off too bad. I mean, they were hanging in there, and it was kind of anybody's game for a little bit. And really, even at about 7 minutes to go, 7.5 minutes to go in the first half, it was just a 2-point game. And then Utah State gets down to a 2-point game again with about 4.5 to go. Then the Aggies just go cold, and UCLA really pulls away. Jason, our keys just didn't really seem to hit very well. Well, some of them did, but it didn't matter. Utah State did a good job rebounding, did excellent with offensive rebounds, giving themselves second chance opportunities. But one of our keys was pace and 3-point shooting, and seemed like UCLA controlled both of those.
Yeah, I kind of made the assumption that if, because I harped on my two big keys being rebounding and then forcing a few turnovers, get out and run. I felt like they actually kind of did both of those things. I don't think they were, that great in forcing turnovers. They had a few early ones, but didn't have too many turnovers. I guess I just failed to account for the fact that it was actually possible for the Aggies to go like 4 of 31 from 3. I assumed they wouldn't do that bad. So the fact that even though they did hit on a few of my keys, they were just so awful in that 3-point shooting that everything else that they were doing well for the most part in that game just didn't end up mattering. Yeah,
and look, Mason Falslev came to play, but it didn't seem like he got much help. Eventually, Dayton Albury got into double figures because he was doing some things in the second half. He had a personal run there for a little bit, but too little, too late. Just didn't get much contributions from anybody else. And poor Ian Martinez, but the lid was on the bucket for him all night long. Only one basket for him. And even though he put up 11 shots, he just could not score, which was very uncharacteristic for Ian.
Yeah, and I think it was either his first or his second game all season where he didn't score double figures. And yeah, just absolutely not the way that you want to go out, because that's his final game of his college career. He's now going to likely turn pro. We'll see if I don't know if the NBA is going to be in store for him, but overseas at minimum, if he wants to continue his professional career, that's there for him. But the fact that this is the last game, it really hurts. And mind you, the vast majority of Aggie players kind of go out with a whimper, because that's the way careers tend to end. Because you never get to ride off into the sunset. But in the end, we can, nobody's going to remember this game as Ian Martinez's legacy. He had a bad game. It sucks. But he's going to be remembered for a lot of different things, and they're all going to be the positives. So it sucks in the moment for a lot of these players, given that most of them played bad. Even Mason, who had a statistically good game in some areas, he shot 6 for 17. So he wasn't perfect either, as hard as he played. And I really shouldn't criticize him too hard for going 6 for 17 when that was pretty much the only blemish on his game. But the whole team really struggled, and that's how you get a 47-point performance and a 25-point loss in the NCAA tournament.
So some of the things that stood out to you, I mean, we've talked about rebounding, we've talked about the lack of execution from beyond the arc, but what are some of the other things that stood out to you watching it in real time courtside?
I'll be honest, I don't know if there's a whole lot that could have stood out much more than that 3-point shooting. But, a few of the things that did pop up. One, they brought the energy, at least early on. They were really gunning for this win. You cannot accuse this team of being unprepared. You cannot accuse this team of being unmotivated. There's very few things that you can say negatively about this team's effort to try and win this game. Execution, sure, we can go into that, but so much of that was still down to 3-point shooting. The shots just didn't fall. And I think the Bruins defense had a lot to do with that. They were able to slow down the Aggies, as a lot of teams have been able to do. And Coach kind of talked about that after the game, where he felt like personnel-wise, they struggled to find a scheme that could stand up to teams watching film and eventually learning it. That's why he's harped on getting a big man. You could actually see with UCLA how they opened up outside shooting by Adimara. He had 10 points, but his biggest impact was forcing the Aggie defense to collapse and then generating open 3-point shots, which UCLA made. They went 10 of 24. So that's something that the Aggies lack. It's something that they need. And so if they're able to get that, then, it's something that can really help a team. There's obviously a lot of things that went wrong, but I think at least one time it needs to be said how well these guys and how hard these guys went out there and played, even if it ended up kind of going horribly wrong in the end.
Yeah, this is a narrative that I saw playing out last night on social media, one that we've heard for a little while at the end of the season and even in the conference tournament, that teams are figuring out Utah State's matchup zone. That wasn't really the problem last night for Utah State in my mind. Yeah, Mara posed challenges, and UCLA is familiar with that general construct of that defensive scheme. The problem last night was the offense, and the Aggies just could not hit. It's not like they didn't have good looks. They had decent looks. They just couldn't make their shots. So UCLA did some things defensively to be quick on switches and rotations. So they were quick to take away space for a lot of the Aggies. But the Utah State generally had pretty good looks. They just couldn't get the shots to fall. So this was an offensive problem, not a defensive problem in my mind last night.
Yeah, UCLA scored 72 points in the game. I know they were kind of taking their foot off the gas a little bit at the end. But if you'd have told me before the game that the Aggies would hold UCLA to 72 points, I'd have been like, that's a target score the Aggies should be able to reach on offense. Would not have expected them to only score 47, even against a good UCLA defense. So, yeah, the problem was largely on offense. And I don't know how much more I can take of people saying that the zone defense, the scheme is the problem. The scheme isn't the problem. I get it's a bit gimmicky. I get that in a lot of situations, a zone defense like this isn't viable. But most of those, pretty much all those situations are, high major basketball where even then you can still throw out a zone and have it work sometimes, and then it's not typically going to work full time at a professional level. But at the collegiate level, and even going and playing in some of these tournaments, you can play a matchup zone. Is it the most ideal form of defense? I wouldn't say so. I tend to like man-to-man schemes better just because that's what works at the highest level of basketball, and there's a reason everybody runs a man at the highest level of basketball. But the scheme isn't the problem. You can have an elite zone defense at the collegiate level. And I think a lot of the defensive problems ended up being personnel, issues where, you don't have a rim protector. Because I think that ended up being a massive issue, is the Aggies couldn't defend the paint effectively without throwing numbers into the paint. And that's where the open three-pointers came from. If the Aggies had a rim protector, then suddenly, just go back and watch the UCLA game where the Aggies were suddenly afraid to shoot or couldn't hit inside shots, and how much that helped UCLA's perimeter defense. Or just go watch any team that has a dominant rim protector and see how much it helps their perimeter defense, not just their interior defense. So I feel like the problem isn't the zone. The problem lies in the execution. Would it be nice to have an elite man-to-man defense? I mean, I guess it'd be nice to have an elite defense no matter what. But people just picking on the scheme as if that's the issue, the Aggies would be having issues if they played man-to-man defense too, because it's not a schematic issue. It's an execution and personnel problem where the players weren't playing defense, at least effectively. So no matter what the scheme was, they'd have had problems late in the season because they just weren't able to guard teams effectively based on the game plan they had.
Let's talk about the lineups and the rotations that Coach Calhoun used Thursday night in Lexington. He started with a different starting lineup than we've seen. Not totally unique. It has happened before, but it was rare. The starting lineup that was employed, having Carson Templin and Tucker Anderson in the starting lineup with Dexter Akano and Abin Gadarazzi coming off the bench.
Yeah, and I mentioned this on social media before the game. I was pretty sure, and I didn't end up asking Coach about it after the game, so it's such a minor point, but my guess is that it pretty much would have had entirely to do with matchups. Carson going up against Tyler Bilodeau, that would have been a solid matchup, but really more importantly in this factor was Abin Gadarazzi against Adi Mara. You could tell they were comfortable with Gadarazzi defending Mara one-on-one for the most part. They kind of threw doubles at him, but not nearly as aggressively as I thought they might. And so I think that was the biggest thing, is they knew Mara was going to come off the bench, so they wanted to match Gadarazzi's minutes almost entirely with Mara, although they still did have Templin on Mara for probably about a third of Mara's minutes, so maybe that wasn't entirely the reason, but I felt like that would have been a big reason. As for why Tucker was in for Akano early on, that may have also been a thing with wanting to have length. I don't know why now would have been the time to make that decision, given the Aggies have had similar games where they could have had Tucker in because they wanted another 6'9" player out there. Or maybe they just thought Dexter would be more effective coming off the bench, because sometimes players just they can get into a rhythm. For whatever reason, they can find their way into rhythm better coming off the bench than starting the game. So, yeah, I think the Templin-Gadarazzi switch had mostly to do with matchups, although I couldn't tell you exactly why Tucker was in for Dexter. But they'd played around with that power forward position several other times in the season. It just hadn't happened in a minute. So that's why it was a bit of a surprise.
And the guys that we talked about yesterday about needing to be those X factors, those secondary players to play a larger role, larger than normal role. For me, it was Tucker Anderson and Isaac Davis. We never saw Isaac Davis. Tucker Anderson hit an early 3-point shot. He was able to get some rebounds, but he was largely kind of quiet on offense, at least. And then for you, it was Abin Gadarazzi and Dexter Akano. And those two guys relatively quiet on offense as well. So the guys that we were hoping for to see step up really didn't. Of course, we could have said that about anybody not named Mason Falslev or even Dayton Albury to a degree and been right that they didn't step up.
Yeah, I mean, you get 29 points out of Mason and Dayton, and then the three other starters, Tucker, Carson, and Ian, they combined for 9 points. Then you get 9 points off the bench. Yeah, you could have picked any combination of those players, said they were your key players, and they would have underperformed. So, yeah, they didn't get the big games, didn't get the support performances that the Aggies really needed out of some of these guys. If two of any of the other players had gone off for like double figures, say Carson had 11 points, Tucker had 15, this would have been a far more winnable game. But you just didn't get that. And I do want to mention another thing, because you mentioned not seeing Isaac Davis. And I saw some people, bringing up Isaac Davis. Why don't you bring in Isaac Davis? Why don't you bring in Isaac Davis? And this is another thing where sometimes I sound like I'm defending Calhoun and I'm white knighting for him, but it's people being wrong on the internet, and I have a radio show, so I'm going to get my say here. But people being couch coaches saying, we need Isaac Davis. I'm like, what's Isaac Davis going to do? And I don't say that to mean that he's bad. Like, what is Isaac Davis going to come in and do? He's going to come in and play physical, and he's going to get some, scrappy rebounds, some effort, maybe get a layup or something, probably like a dump off pass. Like those are the things that he's able to do as a true freshman. That's not what the Aggies needed. Isaac Davis wasn't going to bring anything that the Aggies were lacking. They were rebounding fine. They were playing physical inside for the most part. Okay. It made more sense when they were asking for Isaac Johnson, because it's just like, can somebody please, for the love of all that is holy in this world, hit a three-pointer? And Isaac Johnson came in and actually did that. He brought something the Aggies were missing. So when they were calling for Isaac Johnson, it made sense. Calling for Isaac Davis, like, what's he going to bring that Carson wasn't bringing? What's he going to bring that Aubin wasn't bringing? So it was a bit of couch coaching. That in the, whining about the matchup zone, it felt like, guys, are we actually watching the game and understanding what's going on here to really know what's been wrong with this team?
My only thought with Isaac Davis is just that Utah State was in a similar situation against Colorado State in the Mountain West Conference semifinal game, and he was able to move guys around a little bit more than the other Utah State bigs, which then created a little bit more space for other players to operate offensively. Because he didn't really do a lot himself offensively, but he was able to bring a different level of physicality and movement that some of those other guys weren't able to do. But I don't know that he would have had that much of a difference, but I was a little surprised that we just didn't see him at all. You're down by 25 late, or 20. Why not get him in there for some NCAA experience? There were some people suggesting that maybe he was under the weather and he was sick, but did you observe anything like that in the shoot around the day before?
Yeah, he was looking sick. He actually left the court, and we were sitting on the sidelines, me and Sean Harrison, wondering if he went and threw up or something, because he didn't look super healthy. And then he was sitting on the sideline during shoot around, looking kind of under the weather. Mind you, I was all the way across the court, so it's like I'm trying to read whether or not somebody's sick from about 75 feet away, but that may very well have played a factor in whether or not he played. And I can see where you're coming from, where it's like, it's weird that he didn't get any minutes. I can see that to some degree, but acting like throwing in Isaac Davis was going to fix anything, that's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. The other thing that was interesting about the night is what happened after the game. Coach Calhoun in the press conference did address some of these rumors about him being attached to the opening at West Virginia. How did that play out, and how did that come up?
So I know I got orders from you to make sure that I asked it, but then Sean Harrison, I told Sean I was going to ask the question, but then Sean ended up asking it instead of me. If he hadn't asked, I was going to ask next. So I do want some credit for being willing to ask the question. But yeah, Sean with the Herald Journal asked it. And Jared Calhoun, I'd call it an expert dodge. He pretty much said about as much as he possibly could without giving any sort of commitment, without even really addressing that he was, in any rumors. Like, he said initially, like, I'm willing to talk about it, but then he, again, didn't acknowledge anything about the rumors. He just went on a long discussion on how much Utah State as a program has grown, and seemingly listing out all the reasons that he was considering. I know he didn't say this outright, but to me it kind of comes across as all the different reasons that he would potentially want to stay. Like, understanding that, hey, this isn't a program that is devoid of NIL. They've made massive strides to the point where they could have one of the highest valued rosters in the league next year. If the rumors about how much money, and even some of the statements that have been confirmed by Calhoun, if that amount of money is being thrown around, the Aggies could have the highest paid team next year or close to it. And that's a massive thing for these coaches. Like, it's, at this point for coaches, it's all about how much NIL do you have. And that's, potentially the biggest thing. So having that can keep a coach around. And then, for Calhoun, obviously he wants to chase national relevance. That in a lot of ways tends to be the end goal for a lot of these coaches. be in a nationally relevant program. If mid-majors can accomplish that, then coaches will stick around. Brian Dutcher is going to stay in San Diego State because they're a nationally relevant program. Mark Few up at Gonzaga, that's a nationally relevant program at a mid-major. Now, they're all going to be in the same conference in the Pac-12, and Utah State's going to that same conference. So that could help with Utah State's national relevance. They're becoming a staple in the NCAA tournament with, 3 straight years and 6 of the last 7 tournaments, although one of those tournaments didn't happen. So it's like 5 in the last 6 tournaments that have been held, or I may be one off on the numbers there. But, Calhoun went down the list and was like, here are the reasons why, he could stay. Again, not saying that outright, but essentially that's kind of what it came across as to me, is a list of reasons why he would want to stay. But in the end, West Virginia can offer more. And Calhoun also has connections. It's the only reason he's really connected to the West Virginia job to begin with. If he didn't have those connections, West Virginia would be going somewhere else. Because Calhoun's not the hottest name on the overall market. It's just West Virginia. That is the issue. So it kind of sucks that, he, for fans who are maybe hoping that he would say something more outright, but he pretty much left the door open. Jared Calhoun's going to be talking with West Virginia over the weekend and could very easily end up leaving because West Virginia can offer him more. He's from that part of the country, grew up in Ohio and obviously has connections to West Virginia through Bob Huggins. Basically, the only hope for Utah State to keep him lies, one, if they can just outright convince Jared Calhoun that he's better off at Utah State, which is a long shot but is semi-possible. And then the other one is if West Virginia goes for Ben McCollum. I believe he's the Drake head coach. He's kind of universally seen in some West Virginia people are saying that McCollum is higher on the list, but he's connected to Iowa as well. They'd have to beat out Iowa for McCollum. And there's also the fact that Drake is still playing. They won their first round game against Missouri, so they'll play on Saturday. West Virginia's probably going to want this all done and dusted by the middle of next week at the latest. So, if McCollum isn't even available to call him, I don't know if they just hire Calhoun because they aren't patient, but I don't know, that delay, the fact that Calhoun is more available right now to be interviewed, that may end up being another consequence of losing in the first round. It may make it more likely that the Aggies lose Calhoun. But basically, if you're a Utah State fan, root really hard for Ben McCollum to go to West Virginia, because if he does, then the Aggies are keeping Calhoun. I'd be surprised if Calhoun goes elsewhere, because again, Calhoun's not really high in the totem pole of the coaching carousel right now. It's mostly the connections to West Virginia that, have him in line for that job. And unfortunately right now, by most accounts, he's the most likely candidate.
Yeah, the other one that I hear or that I've seen attached to the job is just the elevating assistant coach, Chester Frazier. Just keep things going with what has been established in a short amount of time in their program. But, Calhoun at Youngstown State, was a successful coach. He was a good coach. But certainly at Utah State, he's gotten the Aggies to the NCAA tournament. And if you're any power conference school looking to fill your vacancy, you're going to want to go after somebody who has NCAA tournament experience. And now he does as a head coach. He certainly did as an assistant there at West Virginia. But now he's got that experience as a head coach, but he hasn't won in the NCAA tournament just yet. So maybe that gives him a little bit of pause. Who knows? But certainly there is that connection because he was an assistant there for a long time. Joe Mazzulla was there with him, and he's now with the Boston Celtics, and he keeps good tabs on what's going on in West Virginia and can be an influencer there to get his good friend that head coaching job at the place where they came to know each other. So there's couple of different factors at play here that may be working towards Jared Calhoun heading that direction. But then again, maybe not. Maybe his resume isn't quite up to where a power school like that would want it to be with some of the history that they've had.
Yeah, and that's, if you're an Aggie fan, you're kind of really hoping that West Virginia's AD, Ren Baker, has some pause over Calhoun's resume as far as being a Power 5 coach. I know the Aggies, they want him here. They've seen what he's done in Logan, but for a power conference school, maybe the resume isn't as robust. Heck, when Calhoun came to Utah State, his resume wasn't even particularly good. His resume was, decent D2 coach, been an assistant on some good head coaches, and Youngstown State had been a decent team. And it was kind of that relative, Youngstown State's was, kind of a terrible program, and he made them pretty decent. And, he built a foundation there because Youngstown State was still pretty decent this season. I think they made it to the conference tournament championship game again. So you'd hope that they would hesitate there if you're an Aggie fan. I know some of the fans, when they've seen Jared Calhoun's name, they obviously recognize the connections, but they're like, is he a good head coach? And there's also discussions of just the fact that Jared Calhoun has, his connection to West Virginia is through Bob Huggins. Does that give the university some pause? Because that, obviously wasn't a very healthy breakup between Huggins and West Virginia, between the administrations and the longtime head coach. But the fans obviously still love Huggins for the most part. So I don't think they're going to be upset if Huggins is kind of welcomed back into the program through Jared Calhoun. And I don't think the administration will give that much pause to it, given it's not like they're rehiring Bob Huggins, they're just hiring Jared Calhoun. So there's a bunch of different straws that you can grasp if you're an Aggie fan, hoping that Calhoun won't end up at West Virginia. But I'm going to be honest, it's not looking particularly good outside of West Virginia going with Ben McCollum.
So where do the Aggies go from here? Certainly there are players whose eligibility has expired, and they have to start to explore options outside of college basketball. There are others who could hit the portal. There are others that look like they could stick around. But right now it's probably really too hard to tell what this roster is going to look like at all anywhere with just the current state of college basketball, and it may depend on what Coach Calhoun decides to do, which could affect the stability of the roster as well.
Yeah, the problem with looking ahead to next year's roster is Jared Calhoun's situation. At this point, he's the most important person to retain for the entire program, because just about everything's going to hinge on whether he stays. If he goes, then at that point, just consider the roster empty and work from there. Some of the guys may stay, but it'd be hard to tell. Maybe Mason stays. I have reason to believe that he's pretty likely to stay if Jared Calhoun stays around. The Aggies will be able to make competitive NIL offers with him compared to what else is being thrown around and offered to him already, because that's the tampering world we live in. But yeah, if Calhoun goes, then everything's up in the air. If he stays, then they're going to get to work, and they're going to throw as much money as they can at a transfer center. I was doing some research last week, like who are some, bigs who have a back to the basket game or a decent scoring game, along with some rebounding and rim protection abilities. And in 30 minutes, I found like 4 different guys who could fit that bill. And it's been the better part of a week since I checked. So there's more guys in the portal. So they're going to have options. That's not to say they're going to necessarily hit on one of them, but they'll have pretty good odds to get somebody with the amount of money they're planning on throwing at one of these transfer bigs. But again, they got to find a way to keep Calhoun, Because if they don't keep Calhoun, the plan just goes out the window. The roster building goes out the window because suddenly you basically don't have a roster given the nature of college basketball. And the new coach has to come in, convince as many of the players to stay as he can, try and convince Mason, who at that point would be on his fourth coach. He'll have had a new coach every single year for all of his career, and he'll be going into his redshirt junior season. I don't know, Mason would end up having to get a new coach anyway, but can you convince a guy to stick with the program if you can't even keep his head coach? So you can't even really look toward roster building until the Calhoun situation gets resolved. And once that happens, I can tell you all different kinds of ways that this roster could end up improving, getting better with the recruits that come in, because that's another thing. If Calhoun leaves, just say goodbye to all the recruits that are coming to the Aggies. Some of them may still come, but I bet all of them end up decommitting. So it's just there's everything hangs on whether or not Calhoun stays or goes. And it's not the end of the world if Calhoun goes, because then you bring in another coach and he brings in all of his recruits and he brings a couple transfers over from his previous school. And you do what the Aggies have done for 3 years now, and that is be a consistently solid team, no matter how long the head coach has been there, no matter who the head coach is. But as far as being specific about the upcoming roster, yeah, you got to give me a few days on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, and I know that there's the sense that, hey, Utah State's gone through it before. They'll go through it again. They'll get it figured out because they've got a good basketball culture here. And I think there is something to that. I mean, there's an expectation. There's a fan base. There's a great student section. But, I mean, eventually that catches up with you. I mean, it's so unreal what Utah State's been able to accomplish over these last couple of years with such a revolving door with coaches. Eventually that does catch up to you. But where Utah State does have a strong basketball culture and a great fan base, it will be an appealing destination for some, for coaches and players. So if Calhoun walks, it's not necessarily the end of the world. There's a proven track record that new coaches come in and they can still have success. It still stings, and there's still the risk that maybe it won't work out this time, but there is a track record here that when these coaches come, there are a lot of factors that help them succeed.
Yeah, well, and I think you make a lot of good points where a lot of the culture, the fan base, the ability to attract good coaches and good players along with those coaches is really going to help. But another thing is look, if Calhoun walks, he's not taking Utah State's NIL with him. So as much as we've talked about this kind of, we haven't used this analogy, but feeling like it's kind of just rolling the dice again, the dice is slightly loaded with Utah State when they're rolling on these coaches. There's still a chance they can miss. But I think with the resources that they've gotten and with the program that they have that's facilitated all of these coaches having success, along with obviously the coaching ability of those guys, you can't discount that. But I don't think that it would really set back the program a ton. Really, what would worry me the most is that you aren't taking a step forward. I think the best the Aggies could do is they could just take a step laterally. They'd have another season where they're a decent Mountain West team, fight for contention at the top, and probably lose in the Mountain West tournament, probably lose in the first round of the NCAA, or maybe host an NIT. I feel like that ends up being your potential over and over, whereas they don't have a chance to elevate. Because we keep talking about, can Utah State be the next San Diego State or Gonzaga? They can't do that without the continuity. And what you see with what Jared Calhoun was bringing in next year, it's one of the most promising freshman classes ever. And you combine that with what would be a really good veteran backcourt, a potential all-time Aggie great in Mason Falslev, who would be entering in his player of the year era of his career. because we've seen his promising freshman and promising sophomore, but like we saw with Sam Merrill, and heck, you could say you saw that with Donovan Dent with New Mexico this year. Once they hit that junior year, suddenly it's superstar mode. And the Aggies are entering that phase with Mason Falsop, so you combine that with a promising freshman class. If they got like a star-level transfer big, you pair Mason with a star big that he can run pick-and-roll action with, and that can open up three-point shooting for guys like Tucker. Combine that with some of these promising freshmen. With such a young team next year, they'd probably be similar to San Diego State, probably slightly better because they'd have guys like Mason and maybe a star big, assuming they're able to get one. But may not be the peak. But then you would look at like the next year, and Utah State would, people talk about the ability to make the Sweet 16. If the Aggies were able to retain continuity with Mason, with one or two really great transfer big men, and this incoming freshman class when they hit like their sophomore year, where they've had a year of development, that team combined with like a senior year Mason Falsop, that would actually be a Sweet 16 team.
Yeah, you look at Mason's just a sophomore, Tucker is a sophomore, Carson's a sophomore. I mean, there's a lot of good players on this team who still have a lot of years left in them that if they stick around, wow, they could be really dynamic.
Yeah, and so that's what Utah State ends up missing out on. If Calhoun leaves, as I said, they're probably going to have another 20-win season. Anywhere between 20 and 26. That seems to kind of be the window I think they could hit, given where they are and given the roster they could field with NIL. But that'd be their peak. They'd have another year like this. Great, wonderful. Fans love it, and there's nothing really wrong with that. But if the program has higher ambitions, they have to be able to retain some of this continuity, because that's where you can rise to a level above. And it's what separates Utah State from programs like New Mexico and Colorado State and Boise State at this point. Utah State legit has the potential to rise above the level of a mid-major. Jared Calhoun noted he talked about he doesn't see Utah State as a mid-major. He sees them as a mid-plus. I don't agree with him in that sentiment at the moment, but I agree that the Aggies can become that. That Gonzaga, who you'd call a mid-plus or even a high major, San Diego State, if we're introducing that term mid-plus, that's what San Diego State is. They're not on the level of Gonzaga, but they're on their way there. Utah State legit has the potential to be that mid-plus to high major in a mid-major conference. They have that legitimate potential, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat things or pump up the crowd. I legit believe that they have that potential, but it has to come down to them managing to keep their coach. And ideally it's Calhoun, because he's the closest they've come to a guy who seems willing to stick around. But if it's not him, find somebody. But again, if you lose Calhoun, it's going to set you back 3 years in this process. Whereas if they keep Calhoun this offseason, then they're on the trajectory to having a team that can be a Sweet 16, Elite 8 caliber team. And if you lose him, all that falls down like a house of cards.
Yeah, so big questions still here for and Aggies will be waiting on pins and needles over the next few weeks here to see when Coach Calhoun decides to stay or go. And then it's the transfer portal, which is opening up soon for players to see how many of them decide to stay or go. But it may first hinge upon Coach Calhoun's decision on what he decides to do. So the transfer portal for players opens when? Is it
Monday.
On Monday? Oh, that's right. Because the
Calhoun
first
said Monday. I haven't fact checked that, but I assume he's not lying or not misinformed. So it opens up. It's basically already opened up. Players are already saying they're entering.
Yes.
But like legally contacting players and commitments, that's when things can start happening, is on Monday.
Yes, it's a tenuous time of the year for Aggie fans and mid-majors around the country, really.
It's one of my, it's one of my busier times, because that's when I spend a month watching film on a bunch of new transfers. And depending on whether Calhoun stays, I'm going to either be heavily researching 2 of them or 12 of them.
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, Jason, it's been fun having you there, and really to be able to connect with you in Lexington, to have eyes on the ground and in the arena, be there to not just see what happens, but also kind of get a feel for it. Because hearing things can be one, but seeing body language is another. And so, interesting to hear your reactions to what happened last night, going in throughout the game and even after the game with the press conference. So travel safe, and we'll be back in studio together again on Monday.
All right, looking forward to it.
All right, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of the Full Court Press podcast special edition, recapping what happened in the NCAA tournament for the Utah State Aggies as they took on the UCLA Bruins.